There's a ritual in our house where I'm a writer, so I don't just read stories to the kids, I make up my own and tell them. And that night I made up a story that began like this. I said, once upon a time, a long time ago, I knew somebody with two dads. And Timmy, the older kid, kind of jerked up in the dark in bed and kind of looked at me and said, "Who?" And I said, his name was Daddy. And Tad sat up in the dark over on this side and leaned forward, looking at my neck as if for a stump of down-the-arm head. And then for the next, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, somewhere in there, I told these two precious little boys lying beside me in the dark, this house in Austin, Texas, a kind of Ajaxed or sanitized version of one of the chapters in the things they carried. It's a story called On the Rainy River. It's the story of a young man bearing my name, Tim O'Brien, who found himself in the summer of 1968 drafted to fight in a war in which he did not believe. It seemed to me as a college graduate, fresh out of McAllister College, that the best you could say about Vietnam was that certain blood was being shed for uncertain reasons. Which is to say that bodies were not in dispute. They were certain. Dead people were dead. And the orphans were orphans, and the widows were widows. And the kids without their fathers were real kids. Nobody, whether you're a liberal or a conservative, there was no argument about that. But on the other side of the equation, anyone in this room, and there are a lot of you, I can just look at this audience and know it, who lived through that era, know what I'm talking about when I say the whole country was disputing the rectitude of that war. In the halls of Congress, hawks were at the throats of doves, and smart Rhodes Scholars couldn't make their minds up about the rectitude of the war. The protests had spilled out into the city streets when I was drafted. This was the summer of the Chicago Convention. Tear gas everywhere. People yelling at one another. Contention everywhere you went in this country, including in my own family. My mom was for that war. My dad was against it. Imagine that irony. My dad, a veteran of World War II. The reasons for the war were at best ambiguous. Was it a war of nationalism, a war to stop the communists, a war to stop aggression, a war of economics, a war of hegemony? All these and a million other issues were in dispute in this country. And it seemed to me then, as a college graduate, and it seems to me today, as a 66-year-old guy, that you don't go off killing people unless you're pretty sure it's the right thing to do. Pretty sure. And our country wasn't pretty sure. We were divided right down the middle, as anyone in this room who went through that period knows. Well, what do you do if you're a 20-year-old kid, fresh out of college, doesn't know much about the world, except what he's read in books and newspapers, and find yourself one day back in your hometown in southern Minnesota, coming off the golf course and opening up the mailbox and finding a little yellow piece of paper, which is greetings from Uncle Sam, you've been drafted. I remember taking that piece of paper and walking, it was about, 1 in the afternoon or so, and walking into the kitchen, a small little town I grew up in, and my mom and dad were having lunch. I remember putting the piece of paper on the kitchen table. Then I didn't say anything, I just put it down and they knew what it was with one glance. I sat down and had a sandwich, and maybe midway through that sandwich, my dad said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know. Just wait." Wait for what? I don't know. Wait for God to save me or the war to end. But just wait. Praying that I wouldn't descend into that nightmare we now call the Vietnam War. I spent the summer of 1968 working in a meatpacking plant in my hometown after having been drafted. At that line, I looked over and Tad was asleep, Timmy was asleep. At that line, that meatpacking line, and I remember thinking just briefly, should I stop? And just walk out of this room in the middle of my story? And I did. I just kept going. At first aloud, but then telling the story in my head, as I've been telling it now for 40 years in my head. Not every night, but many nights.